Picture the night sky splitting open, stars colliding like shattering glass as gods and monsters wage war beyond the edges of the universe. Lightning cracks between titanic figures, their voices shaking the foundations of the earth. This isn't just fantasy. For thousands of years, cultures around the world have whispered about these cataclysmic battles, where celestial beings clashed in struggles that shaped creation itself. From the thunderous wars of Zeus and the Titans to the epic duels of Norse giants, these stories aren't just entertainment. They're humanity's first attempts to explain the chaos and wonder of the cosmos, written in the language of myth. What if I told you these ancient tales scattered across continents and buried in crumbling scrolls share eerie similarities? A Babylonian creation myth describes the sky god Marduk slaying the dragon Tiamat, her body becoming the heavens and earth. Half a world away, the Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl battling the monstrous Titanomachy to keep the stars from crashing down. And in India, the Rigveda sings of Indra smashing the serpent Vritra to release the waters of life. These aren't coincidences, they're echoes of a primal human question: what happens when cosmic forces collide? That's exactly what we're uncovering today. Across 30 of history's most breathtaking cosmic battle myths, we'll trace how civilizations turned their awe of the unknown into legends of gods, monsters, and universe-shaking wars. You'll hear how Polynesian heroes fished up islands from the depths while Japanese spirits dueled with hurricanes. You'll discover why Greek poets imagined the Milky Way as spilled divine blood, and how these stories still shape our understanding of everything from eclipses to supernovas. So settle in, because this isn't just a tour through dusty old tales. It's a journey to the moment our ancestors looked up at the stars and saw the greatest battles ever told. Long before gods ruled from Mount Olympus, the universe shuddered under the fists of the Titans, primordial giants who birthed the cosmos itself. Their king, Cronus, had seized power by overthrowing his own father, the sky god Uranus, with a sickle forged by his mother Gaia. But Cronus's reign was built on fear. Swallowing his children whole to prevent a prophecy of his downfall, he never imagined his youngest son, Zeus, would survive hidden in a cave on Crete, nurtured by divine goats and armored in destiny. When Zeus grew strong enough to challenge his father, he didn't fight alone. Freeing his siblings Hera, Poseidon, and Hades from Cronus's belly, he rallied allies even the Titans feared. Deep in the Earth's molten heart, the Cyclopes forged Zeus's thunderbolts, weapons so powerful their explosions carved valleys. The 100-handed ones, monsters with 50 heads and 100 arms each, hurled mountains like pebbles. For 10 years, the war raged, shaking the pillars of the world. Lightning split the heavens, oceans boiled, and the very air trembled as Olympus became a battlefield. Victory came at a price. Zeus cast Cronus and the defeated Titans into Tartarus, a void darker than space, where chains of divine metal bound them for eternity. But this wasn't just a change of rulers, it was the birth of a new cosmic order. The Titans represented raw, untamed nature. The Olympians brought laws, justice, and human-like passions to the universe. Even the stars realigned, as Greek poets claimed the Milky Way was formed from drops of divine blood spilled in the battle. Yet whispers lingered. Some Titans, like Prometheus, sided with Zeus and were spared. Others, like Oceanus, ruled domains untouched by war, and Gaia, the earth herself, never forgot her children's fall, a grudge that would later spark new rebellions. The Titanomachy wasn't just a war, it was the moment chaos was chained and the cosmos as we know it began. With the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, Zeus didn't just inherit the throne, he rewrote the rules of existence. Thunderstorms became his voice, rolling across the heavens as a reminder of the divine weapons that toppled the old order. Ancient Greeks didn't see lightning as mere weather. To them, every crackle and boom was Zeus hurling another thunderbolt, a celestial echo of the Titanomachy's fury. Even the earth bore scars of that war. Volcanoes were said to be buried titans, still breathing fire in their chains, while earthquakes trembled from their struggles. This wasn't just mythology, it was an entire civilization's way of explaining the unpredictable violence of nature through the lens of cosmic war. But Zeus's victory did more than shape the weather. It mirrored a pattern found in myths from Ireland to India, the chaos camp, the battle between order and chaos. The Hindu god Indra, much like Zeus, wielded a thunderbolt to slay the serpent Vritra, releasing the waters of life. Norse legends told of Thor battling the world serpent Jörmungandr, their clashes shaking Yggdrasil, the great world tree. These stories weren't isolated. They were variations on a theme, the triumph of structured, life-giving forces over primal, formless destruction. The Greeks, though, took it further. Their Olympians didn't just win, they transformed. Zeus became a ruler of justice, dividing dominion with his brothers, Poseidon ruling the seas, Hades the underworld, while he commanded the sky. This division wasn't arbitrary, it reflected the Greek ideal of balance, a universe where even gods had limits, yet the Titanomachy's shadow lingered. Prometheus, the titan who'd sided with Zeus, soon defied him by stealing fire for humanity, a betrayal that cost him an eternity of torment. And Gaia, the Earth Mother, would later birth the monstrous Typhon to challenge Olympus, proving that the old chaos never truly dies. These twists reveal something profound. The Greeks saw creation as cyclical, not a one-time event. Even victory demanded vigilance. Every storm, every quake was a reminder. Cosmic order is fragile, and the battle between chaos and control never really ends. Deep beneath the horizon, where the sun's light fades into utter blackness, an ancient battle rages, one that never truly ends. Every night, as Ra's golden solar barque plunges into the underworld, the serpent Apep rises from the depths, a mile-long embodiment of pure chaos. His coils twist with malice, his fangs drip venom capable of dissolving stars, and his only desire is to devour the sun itself, to plunge the world into eternal night. But Ra doesn't face him alone. Standing with him are an army of gods, the prayers of priests, and the very magic woven into Egyptian rituals. This isn't just a myth. It's a cosmic blueprint for how the Egyptians believed order triumphed over chaos every single night. Apep wasn't some ordinary monster. Born from the primordial waters of none before creation itself, he existed outside Maat, the sacred balance of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony. Where Ra's journey symbolized rebirth and cyclical time, Apep represented Isfet, the force of disorder that sought to unravel existence. The Egyptians didn't see this battle as metaphorical. They believed Ra's victory was literal and necessary. If Apep ever won, the sun wouldn't rise, the Nile wouldn't flood, and life itself would crumble. That's why temples held nightly rituals where priests burned wax models of the serpent, recited spells from the book of overthrowing Apep, and even stabbed drawings of him with ceremonial knives. Magic wasn't superstition, it was weaponized order, a divine collaboration to ensure dawn would come. The battleground itself, the Duat, Egypt's underworld, was no simple hell. It was a labyrinth of fire lakes, inverted skies, and gates guarded by deities who tested Ra's worthiness to continue his journey. In some versions, the warrior goddess Sekhmet rode ahead of the barque, her lioness form ripping through Apep's minions. Thoth, the god of wisdom, countered Apep's chaos with sacred geometry, using precise spells to bind the serpent's power. Even Set, the god of storms often associated with violence, became a hero in this fight, spearing Apep with a harpoon of meteoric iron. But here's what's fascinating, Apep could never be truly destroyed. Each dawn proved Ra's victory, yet each sunset meant the battle began again. This eternal struggle mirrored Egypt's view of reality, not as a static creation, but as a delicate balance constantly maintained through ritual, morality, and divine will. When pharaohs smited enemies in temple carvings, they weren't just commemorating battles, they were reenacting Ra's triumph, reinforcing Maat on Earth. Even the pyramids, aligned with celestial precision, were stone anchors holding chaos at bay. So the next time you watch a sunset, remember, across millennia, an entire civilization once held their breath, trusting that their prayers and spells would help their sun god win the fight once more. Because if he didn't, the world wouldn't just end, it would unravel from the inside out, one stolen sunrise at a time. Now picture this Ra's solar barque gliding not just through the underworld, but through the star-studded canvas of the night sky itself. The ancient Egyptians didn't just see stars as distant lights, they mapped their myths onto the heavens with breathtaking precision. Tomb paintings and temple ceilings often depict Ra's journey encircled by constellations, his barque floating on a river of stars we now call the Milky Way. To them, this wasn't poetry, it was astronomy in sacred code. When the sun disappeared during an eclipse, priests didn't panic at the science. They saw Apep's jaws clamping down on Ra, a momentary theft of light that demanded rituals to tip the scales back toward order. The connection between myth and cosmos runs even deeper. The Milky Way wasn't just a backdrop, it was the celestial Nile, a mirror of the life-giving river that flowed through Egypt. Just as the Nile's floods brought fertility, the Sky River was thought to nourish the gods. In the Book of the Dead, the deceased soul joins Ra's barque, sailing this starry pathway to rebirth. Tomb artwork from the Valley of the Kings shows this vividly. Golden boats surrounded by hieroglyphic stars, their positions matching real astronomical alignments. Scholars have found that certain tomb ceilings mirror the night sky during specific festivals, proving the Egyptians wove timekeeping, navigation, and myth into a single cosmic tapestry. But the most striking link, solar eclipses. Ancient texts describe Apep as a swallower of light, his strikes timed to the minute. When the sun vanished, priests chanted spells to cut open the belly of the serpent, while crowds beat drums to mimic thunder, the sound of Ra's counterattack. Temple reliefs at Dendera even show eclipses as a disk, the sun battling a serpentine shadow. Modern simulations reveal something astonishing. Many recorded eclipse dates in Egypt align with descriptions of Apep's attacks. This wasn't coincidence, it was a civilization interpreting celestial mechanics through the lens of divine warfare, turning fear into ritual and chaos into a story they could conquer night after night. Yet the true genius lies in what these connections reveal. The Egyptians didn't separate science from spirituality. By mapping Ra's battles onto eclipses and the Milky Way, they created a universe where the sacred and the observable were one. Every eclipse wasn't just an astronomical event. It was a reminder that the gods needed human hands, voices, and faith to keep the cosmos turning. And in that union of myth and sky, they found something timeless, the power to make the unknowable feel like a battle they could fight and win. Before gods or mortals walked the earth, there was only saltwater chaos, a swirling, formless abyss where the dragon Tiamat and her consort Apsu, the sweet water deep, birthed the first generations of deities. But this was no peaceful creation. When their divine children grew too loud, Apsu plotted to silence them forever, only to be slain by his own grandson E, the god of wisdom. What happened next would shake the foundations of existence. Tiamat, enraged by her mate's murder, transformed into something monstrous. She grew 11 kinds of terror-venomous serpents for blood, horns like crescent moons, and an army of demons led by her new champion, Kingu, who wore the tablet of destinies like a crown. This wasn't just a family dispute, it was a war for the soul of the cosmos, and the gods were losing. Enter Marduk, a young storm god with 4 ears to hear all things, 4 eyes to see all corners of the universe, and a voice that could command hurricanes. When the terrified gods begged for a savior, he agreed on one condition: absolute sovereignty. Armed with a net woven from the winds, a mace that could split mountains, and the 7 storms of destruction, Marduk faced Tiamat in a duel that would redefine reality. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, describes their clash in visceral detail. Tiamat's jaws gaping wide enough to swallow the horizon, Marduk hurling winds down her throat until she bloated like a grotesque balloon, then piercing her belly with an arrow that sundered her inward parts tore her heart. But the real genius came after. Marduk didn't just kill Tiamat, he dismantled her. Her skull became the vault of heaven, her tears the Tigris and Euphrates, her corpse the earth itself. Even her defeated general Kingu was repurposed, his blood mixed with clay to fashion the first humans, destined to serve the gods forever. This myth wasn't just storytelling. It was political propaganda carved into cuneiform tablets to justify Babylon's rise. Marduk's ascent mirrored Babylon's own dominance in Mesopotamia, his victory decreeing the city the navel of the world. When Babylonian kings claimed they ruled by Marduk's divine mandate, they weren't speaking metaphorically, they were invoking a cosmic blueprint where order always triumphed through ruthless power. Archaeologists have found copies of the Enuma Elish in temples from Assyria to Anatolia, proof of how myths were weaponized to legitimize empires. Yet beneath the politics lies a profound truth. The Babylonians saw creation not as a gentle act, but as the aftermath of divine carnage. Every river, every star was born from violence and humanity. We're literally made from the losing side. What's haunting is how Tiamat's legacy endures. Some scholars trace her name to the Akkadian word for sea, linking her to the primordial waters of other myths, the Hebrew Teham, the Greek Tethys. Even Marvel Comics reimagined her as a cosmic entity. But in Babylon, she was more than a monster. She was the chaos that preceded reason, the mother who became raw material, a reminder that even gods must destroy to create. When Nebuchadnezzar's architects built ziggurats reaching for Marduk's heaven, they weren't just honoring a god, they were standing on the corpse of a dragon. The echoes of Marduk's victory over Tiamat ripple far beyond Babylon, resounding in myths where storm gods face primordial chaos across the ancient world. Take Yahweh's battle with Leviathan, described in Psalms and the Book of Job, a serpent so vast its coils could choke the sea, breathing fire like Tiamat's venomous storms. Here the parallels are undeniable. Just as Marduk armed himself with the 7 winds, Yahweh is said to wield tempests as weapons, breaking the heads of Leviathan to establish divine order. But the Hebrew tradition adds a twist. Leviathan isn't dismantled into creation. Instead, its defeat becomes a promise of future reckoning, a beast reserved for the apocalypse when chaos will be vanquished once and for all. This shift reflects Judaism's linear view of time. Unlike Babylon's cyclical struggle, where Tiamat's corpse is reused, Leviathan's fate heralds an ultimate triumph. Then there's Indra, the thunder-wielding Hindu god who faced Vritra, a serpent so massive it dammed the rivers of the world. The Rigveda's hymns describe the battle in terms that would feel familiar to Marduk's worshippers. Indra's Vajra, a lightning bolt shattering Vritra's belly, releasing the waters to nourish the earth. But here, the symbolism deepens. Vritra isn't just a monster, it's the personification of drought, a cosmic bottleneck holding back life itself. Indra's victory isn't merely about power, it's about fertility, the monsoon's arrival, the cyclical rebirth of the land. Unlike Yahweh's eschatological Leviathan or Marduk's repurposed Tiamat, Vritra's death is an annual renewal, mirrored in India's seasonal rituals where priests reenact the battle to ensure rain. What binds these stories together? First, the storm god archetype deities who don't just control weather but embody the violent transition from chaos to order. Their weapons are never mundane. Marduk's nets, Yahweh's whirlwinds, and Indra's Vajra are extensions of their divine authority. Second, the monsters themselves. Tiamat, Leviathan, and Vritra aren't mere animals. They're existential threats, embodiments of the void that existed before creation. Their serpentine forms symbolize the untamed, coiled potential of chaos, requiring divine violence to unlock the world's structure. Yet the differences are just as revealing. In Babylon, creation is a one-time act of butchery. In Vedic India, it's a recurring sacrifice. In Hebrew tradition, it's a prelude to final judgment. These variations aren't accidents, they're reflections of how cultures interpreted their environments. The flood-prone Tigris-Euphrates Valley saw chaos as an ever-present danger to be managed. India's monsoon-dependent agriculture demanded myths of cyclical rescue, and the Jewish experience of exile and covenant framed chaos as a test of faith. So the next time you hear thunder, remember, millennia ago, someone looked at that storm and saw a god at war, not just with clouds but with the very boundaries of reality. Imagine a war where both sides are immortal, where every defeat is temporary, every victory fleeting, and the battlefield spans the entire cosmos. This is the eternal struggle between the Devas and Asuras in Hindu mythology, a conflict so fundamental it's woven into the fabric of existence itself. On one side, the Devas, radiant beings of order and celestial power, led by Indra, the thunderbolt-wielding king of gods. On the other, the Asuras, once brothers to the Devas, now twisted by ambition and cosmic illusion, their strength matching their cunning. Their battles aren't just clashes of force, they're philosophical warfare, a dance of creation and destruction played out across eons. At the heart of this struggle lies Indra's most famous weapon, the Vajra, a thunderbolt forged from the bones of the sage Dadhichi. Legend says the Devas, weakened by the Asuras' relentless attacks, begged Dadhichi for help. Without hesitation, the sage meditated until his soul left his body, offering his bones as raw material. When the divine craftsman Tivastar fashioned the Vajra, it wasn't just a weapon, it became a symbol of sacrifice and indestructibility. With it, Indra shattered the fortress of the Asura king Vritra, releasing the waters of life to flow across the world. But here's the catch, Vritra wasn't truly gone. Like all Asuras, he would return because in Hindu cosmology, darkness can never be permanently erased, only held at bay. The stakes escalate in the myth of the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the cosmic ocean. Here, Devas and Asuras temporarily unite, using Mount Mandara as a churning rod and the serpent Vasuki as a rope to extract the nectar of immortality from the depths. But cooperation quickly crumbles. As the ocean yields its treasures, the goddess Lakshmi, the moon, the deadly poison Halahala, the Asuras try to seize the nectar for themselves. Vishnu, the preserver, intervenes in the form of Mohini, a mesmerizing enchantress who tricks the Asuras into surrendering the elixir. This story isn't just about cleverness, it reveals a profound truth. The Asuras' downfall isn't just their strength or numbers, but their inability to resist Maya, the cosmic illusion that distorts perception. Where Devas see unity and balance, Asuras see only opportunity for domination. Yet the Asuras are more than mere villains. Some, like Prahlada, defy their kin's arrogance, embodying devotion even in darkness. Others, like Mahishasura, challenge the gods not just with brute force but with shape-shifting deception, forcing the Devas to create Durga, a goddess fused from their collective power. This dynamic makes their conflict endlessly fascinating. It's not a simple battle of good versus evil, but a tension between competing visions of existence. The Devas uphold Dharma, the cosmic order, while the Asuras personify Adharma, the chaos that tests and ultimately strengthens that order. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is the cyclical nature of their war. Unlike the Greek Titanomachy or Marduk's definitive victory over Tiamat, the Devas and Asuras are locked in an eternal stalemate. Each cycle of conflict ends not with annihilation, but with reset, a reminder that light cannot exist without shadow, and even the gods must constantly reaffirm their purpose. Modern Hindus still reference this struggle during Diwali, the festival of lights, where lamps symbolize the triumph of knowledge over ignorance. But the candles flicker in the darkness, never extinguishing it completely, because the battle isn't meant to be won. It's meant to be lived. the Devas and Asuras' endless war takes on a startling new dimension when viewed through the lens of the Puranas, India's ancient texts of myth and philosophy. Here, the battlefield shifts from celestial planes to the human soul itself. The Asuras, once mere antagonists, become manifestations of inner demons, pride, greed, the illusion of separation. Indra's Vajra transforms into the weapon of discernment, striking through ignorance to reveal truth. This reinterpretation didn't erase the original epic clashes. It layered them with meaning, turning thunderbolts into metaphors for meditation and demon armies into the distractions we battle daily. Consider the story of Tarakasura, an Asura whose name means star in Sanskrit. Early texts describe him as a conqueror who forced even the sun and moon to obey him. But later commentaries reveal a deeper reading. Stars represent fleeting desires, their twinkling allure pulling focus from the eternal. His defeat by the child god Kartikeya symbolizes wisdom conquering attachment, not with brute force but through the purity of a mind unburdened by want. Even the Samudra Manthan, the cosmic churning, gets recast as the yogi's inner labor, where the serpent Vasuki becomes the coiled Kundalini energy, and the deadly poison Halahala represents the ego's resistance to enlightenment. The Puranas take this further by introducing the concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion Asuras embody so completely. When Vishnu descends as Mohini to trick the demons out of immortality's nectar, it's not mere deception, it's a lesson. The Asuras, blinded by their hunger for power, fail to recognize divinity in disguise. In contrast, the Devas perceive Mohini's true nature because their devotion cuts through illusion. This dichotomy mirrors the human struggle. Do we chase external validation like the Asuras grasping for elixirs, or cultivate the Devas' clarity, seeing the sacred in every moment? Yet the most profound twist lies in the Asuras' redemption arcs. Take back to Prahlada, an Asura prince who worships Vishnu despite his father's tyranny. When the demon king Hiranyakashipu tries to kill him through fire, cliffs, even venomous snakes, Prahlada's faith transforms each attack into a revelation. The Puranas frame his survival not as defiance but as surrender to divine will. Here's the radical idea: even demonic lineages can awaken. The battlefield isn't between gods and monsters, it's within every heart where light and shadow duel for dominance. Modern Hindus still engage with these allegories during rituals like Navaratri, where the goddess Durga's victory over the buffalo demon Mahishasura is celebrated. But the deeper teaching lingers. Mahishasura's shape-shifting represents the ego's endless disguises: anger one moment, self-pity the next, while Durga's 10 arms signify the multifaceted discipline needed to overcome them. The weapons she wields, not just tridents and swords, but patience, compassion, and self-awareness. So when the ancients spoke of eternal war, they weren't describing a distant celestial conflict. They mapped the human condition, the daily skirmishes between wisdom and craving, presence and distraction. The real nectar of immortality wasn't in some mythical elixir, but in the choice to churn our own depths, confronting what surfaces with the courage of the Devas and the humility of a Prahlada. After all, if even demons can glimpse divinity, what stops us? The howl splits the sky like a blade, a sound so vast it shakes the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree that binds the 9 realms together. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf born of chaos and prophecy, has broken free from his chains at last. His jaws, once bound by magic ropes forged from a cat's footsteps and a mountain's roots, now gape wide enough to swallow the sun. And waiting for him on the battlefield of Ragnarök stands Odin, the All-Father, his single eye blazing with knowledge of what comes next. This isn't just a battle. It's a reckoning written into the fabric of time itself, a collision of fate and fury that will unravel the cosmos. Fenrir's story begins with deceit. The Norse gods, fearing prophecies that the wolf would destroy them, tricked him 3 times, first with flimsy bonds he snapped effortlessly, then with chains he shattered with ease. But the third binding was different. The dwarves crafted Gleipnir, a ribbon thinner than silk yet stronger than any metal, woven from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footfall, the breath of a fish, the sinews of a bear. When Fenrir sensed treachery, he demanded a god's hand in his mouth as collateral. Only Tyr, the god of war, had the courage to comply. As the wolf realized he couldn't break free, he bit off Tyr's hand, sealing his rage forever. This moment wasn't just about physical chains, it was about broken trust, a betrayal that would echo across centuries until Ragnarok's trumpet sounded. When the final battle comes, Fenrir's vengeance is apocalyptic. The earth quakes as he runs, his paws tearing valleys into the land, his howls summoning storms. Odin, armed with Gungnir, his spear that never misses, rides to meet him, flanked by the Einherjar, warriors chosen from Valhalla's halls. But even the All-Father's wisdom can't rewrite destiny. The Völuspá, an ancient Norse poem, describes the moment with chilling simplicity. Fenrir will gulp down Odin, that will be his death. No grand speeches, no last-minute reprieves. Just the inevitable fulfillment of a prophecy set in motion the moment the gods chose fear over fairness. Yet this isn't truly an end. Norse cosmology revolves not around linear time, but cycles of destruction and rebirth. As Fenrir's jaws close on Odin, his son Vidar leaps forward, stabbing the wolf's heart with a shoe crafted from every scrap of leather humans have ever discarded, a symbol of collective resilience. The sun, swallowed by another wolf, will be replaced by a new one. The earth, drowned in floodwaters, will resurface green and fertile. Even Odin's death serves a purpose. His sacrifice clears the way for a new pantheon, unburdened by the old gods' compromises. What makes this myth so haunting isn't the violence, but the acceptance woven through it. The Norse didn't see Ragnarök as a tragedy. It was a necessary purge, like a forest fire that makes room for fresh growth. Odin knows his fate from the start, yet he doesn't rage against it. He prepares, he trains his warriors, he sends his ravens, thought and memory, to gather knowledge until the last possible moment. In facing Fenrir, he confronts the consequences of his own decisions, turning the wolf into both executioner and mirror. Modern interpretations often miss this nuance, painting Fenrir as a mindless beast. But the Norse understood monsters aren't born, they're made. Every broken promise, every fearful act of control feeds the chaos that will one day consume us. And when that day comes, the lesson isn't to despair. It's to meet destiny like Vidar, with resolve, with ingenuity, and with the quiet understanding that even the end is just another kind of beginning. Worn limestone rises from the English soil, carved with figures that seem to writhe under 1,000 years of rain and wind. The Gosforth cross, standing 10 feet tall in a Cumbrian churchyard, holds secrets in its weathered grooves, serpents coiled around giants, wolves with jaws stretched wide enough to devour the sky. Among them, one image stands out, a beast bound by intricate knots, its body straining against chains that twist like living vines. This isn't just decoration. It's Fenrir, the apocalyptic wolf of Norse myth, immortalized not in a saga or poem, but in stone by Viking hands. The cross dates to the 10th century, a time when Norse settlers clung to their gods even as Christianity spread. Why carve a pagan doomsday onto a Christian symbol? The answer lies in the shadows of a changing world, one where myth wasn't just story, but a lens for survival. Archaeologists have found Fenrir's likeness far beyond Gosforth. A silver amulet from Sweden shows the wolf mid-snarl, his paws clawing at the ribbon Gleipnir. Picture the wearer, a Viking farmer or warrior clutching this charm as storms lashed their longhouse, believing the symbol might hold back chaos a little longer. Even ship burials like the Oseberg vessel in Norway feature carvings of bound wolves alongside depictions of Yggdrasil, as if to tether the world tree's roots against the beast's fury. These artifacts reveal something startling. Fenrir wasn't just a mythological villain. He was a psychological reality, a manifestation of existential fears carved into everyday objects. But why did this particular myth resonate so deeply? The answer might lie in ice cores and tree rings. The Viking Age coincided with the medieval warm period, a climatic anomaly that allowed Norse expansion across the North Atlantic. Yet by the 10th century, temperatures began to plummet, glaciers advanced, crops failed, and the once navigable seas turned treacherous. For a culture that saw the natural world as battleground for gods and monsters, climate collapse wasn't just bad luck, it was Fenrir breaking his chains, the first tremors of Ragnarök. The Völuspá prophecy describes the sun turning black before the final battle, a detail that takes on eerie significance when paired with evidence of volcanic eruptions like the 939 Ilja event in Iceland. Ash veiled the sky for years, staining ice sheets as far as Antarctica. To a Norse farmer watching his fields wither under a blood-red haze, the end truly must have felt near. The Gosforth cross captures this duality perfectly. On one side, Christian imagery of salvation, on the other, Fenrir's snarling jaw. Scholars argue this wasn't contradiction, but synthesis, a way to process catastrophe through both old and new beliefs. When the carving shows the wolf's bonds holding, it's not just illustrating myth. It's offering hope that even as winters grew longer and kingdoms crumbled, the ribbons of civilization might still restrain the chaos. Perhaps that's the real power of these artifacts. They don't just depict a wolf, they freeze a moment when people stared into the abyss of famine and frost and chose to wrestle with it through art. Every stroke of the carver's chisel was a defiance, a declaration that if the world was doomed, they'd face it with their eyes wide open and leave something behind to prove they weren't afraid. High above the jungles of Mesoamerica, where the morning star burns brighter than any other celestial body, two gods wage a war that defines the very rhythm of time. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, lord of night and destiny, whose obsidian blade carves fate into the bones of men. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, bringer of wisdom and wind, whose breath stirs the seeds of civilization. Their conflict isn't just myth, it's written in the staggering precision of Aztec astronomy, etched into temple alignments that track Venus's movements down to the hour. This rivalry didn't spring from petty squabbles. It was a cosmic tug of war between creation and chaos, playing out across centuries of sacred calendars. The most explosive chapter begins with Tezcatlipoca's deception. Disguised as an elderly healer, he offers Quetzalcoatl a gift, a cup of pulque, the fermented drink of the gods. But this is no ordinary brew. It's laced with a potion so potent it shatters the feathered serpent's judgment. Under its influence, Quetzalcoatl breaks every vow of purity. He beds his priestess sister, smashes temple artifacts, and wakes covered in shame. Tezcatlipoca's trick doesn't just humiliate his rival, it fractures the natural order. The once glorious city of Tolan, Quetzalcoatl's domain, descends into ruin as the god flees eastward, vowing to return one day. Here's where astronomy transforms legend into celestial clockwork. The Aztecs observed that Venus associated with Quetzalcoatl disappears as the evening star for 8 days before reappearing as the morning star. These transitions weren't random to them. They marked Quetzalcoatl's exile and rebirth, his journey through the underworld mirrored in Venus's cyclical vanishing acts. Temple pyramids like Chichen Itza's El Castillo encode this drama in stone. During equinoxes, shadows slither down its steps like the feathered serpent himself, a visual echo of his promised return. Even the Dresden Codex, a Maya astronomical text later adopted by the Aztecs, contains Venus tables accurate to within 2 hours over 500 years. These weren't just rituals, they were mathematical prophecies tracking divine war in the stars. Yet Tezcatlipoca's victory is never absolute. In one version of the myth, after burning Tolan to the ground, he transforms Quetzalcoatl into the morning star, not as punishment but as part of an eternal dance. The smoking mirror represents the jaguar-riddled night, while the feathered serpent embodies dawn's first light. Their conflict creates balance, destruction clearing space for renewal, darkness making light meaningful. Modern scholars argue this duality reflects Mesoamerica's climate cycles, dry seasons withering the land so rains can resurrect it. The tragic irony, when Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, their pale skin and sailing ships from the east convinced Montezuma they were Quetzalcoatl's prophesied return. But instead of wisdom, they brought swords. In that moment, Tezcatlipoca's chaos triumphed utterly, not through divine trickery, but through the collision of myth and brutal reality. Yet even in collapse, the gods' battle endures. Today, descendants of the Aztecs still recount how Quetzalcoatl, the morning star, waits beyond the horizon, gathering strength for his next resurrection. Because in this cosmic war, no defeat is final, only suspended, like Venus holding its breath before dawn. The Aztecs didn't just watch the stars, they bled for them. Every sunrise was a gamble, a fragile victory that demanded payment in blood. When priests climbed the steps of the Templo Mayor at dawn, obsidian blades glinting in their hands, they weren't performing empty rituals. They were fueling the cosmos itself, staving off the collapse of the fifth sun, the current era prophesied to end in earthquakes and famine. According to the Codex Chimalpopoca, the world had already been destroyed 4 times. Jaguars devoured the first sun, hurricanes toppled the second, fire rained from the sky during the third, and floods drowned the fourth. The fifth sun, called for movement, was destined to fall too, unless humanity kept the gods nourished with the most precious substance of all, human hearts. This wasn't mere superstition. The Aztecs mapped their sacrificial calendar to celestial events with chilling precision. When Venus, Quetzalcoatl's star, reappeared as the morning star after its 8-day disappearance, priests performed Tlacaxaipuelistli, the flaying of men. Captives, often warriors from rival states, were ritually dressed as gods before their hearts were offered to the sun. The timing wasn't random. Venus's reappearance symbolized Quetzalcoatl's resurrection, and the sacrifices mirrored his mythic journey through the underworld, trading death for renewal. Archaeologists have found Venus-aligned sacrificial daggers at Tenochtitlan, their edges still stained with iron and hemoglobin, proof of how deeply astronomy and bloodshed intertwined. But the stakes grew even higher during Zumulpilli, the new fire ceremony, held every 52 years, a cycle mirroring the convergence of the solar and sacred calendars. As Pleiades crossed the zenith at midnight, priests extinguished every fire in the empire. If the stars didn't align, darkness would swallow the world forever. Then atop Mount Huaxachtlan, a captive's chest was split open and a new flame kindled in his still beating heart. Runners carried this fire to every village, relighting civilization itself. The symbolism was visceral. The sun needed hearts to rise, just as Quetzalcoatl needed sacrifice to return. Skeletons excavated near the Templo Mayor show evidence of Chalchucotl, precious serpent, cuts precise incisions made to extract hearts while victims still pulsed with life. These weren't acts of cruelty, they were acts of cosmic accounting, balancing ledgers written in starlight and veins. The cruel irony, Spanish chroniclers recorded that Moctezuma, believing Cortés to be Quetzalcoatl, initially offered the conquistadors the same reverence given to Venus itself, only to watch them dismantle the very rituals that sustained the fifth sun. Yet traces of the old beliefs linger. Modern Nahua communities still recount how the sun thirsts, and some scholars argue that Dia de los Muertos, with its offerings of food and flowers, echoes the ancient exchange, life for time, blood for dawn. Because in the Aztec cosmos, no battle was ever truly over, just paused, waiting for the next sacrifice to tip the scales. Thunder cracks over the land of Izumo, each bolt splitting the sky like a divine blade. Susanu, the tempestuous storm god, has been exiled from the heavens for his reckless rage. But his fall isn't the end. It's the beginning of a clash that will forge Japan's most sacred relic. Along the Hiei River, a grieving family offers their 8th and final daughter to Yamata no Orochi, an 8-headed serpent so vast its bodies span 8 valleys, its scales glisten with iron-rich blood, and its fiery breath scorches entire forests. This isn't just a monster, it's a calamity made flesh, a force of nature so voracious it devours sacrifice after sacrifice, leaving entire villages in ruins. Susanoo, ever unpredictable, doesn't flee or fight outright. He observes, calculating. Approaching the family, he strikes a bargain, spare their last daughter and he'll slay the beast. But brute force won't work here. The serpent's heads regenerate faster than any blade can sever them, so the god of storms becomes a god of cunning. He orders 8 massive vats of sake brood, each one laced with a potency no mortal could endure, and arranges them atop platforms designed to tempt Oroch's many throats. When the serpent arrives, its head sway drunkenly, drawn by the aroma, and plunge into the vats, gulping until all 8 sets of eyes glaze over. Only then does Susanoo strike, his sword Totsuka note, Tsurugi flashing like lightning, cleaving head after head. As the final neck falls, he discovers something miraculous inside the beast's 4th tail. A blade so sharp it cuts stone without a sound, Kusanagi, the grass cutter, a weapon that will one day rest in the hands of emperors. But the myth doesn't end with the kill. Every detail here vibrates with symbolism. The 8 heads and tails mirror Japan's mountainous terrain, each peak hiding dangers as unpredictable as Oroch's hunger. The sake represents transformation, turning the serpent's own gluttony against it, a lesson in using an enemy's strength as their weakness, and Kusanagi. It's not just a sword, it's sovereignty itself, one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan, alongside the mirror Yota no Kagami and the jewel Yasukuni no Magatama. These objects weren't mere ornaments, they were the divine right to rule, proof that the emperor's lineage descended from the gods. Archaeologists have found serpent motifs in burial mounds from the Coffin period, suggesting Oroch's legend predates written records. Some scholars even link the myth to ancient battles between rival clans, with Susanoo's victory symbolizing the Yamato dynasty's rise. But the most haunting parallel lies in nature itself. The Hiei River, where Orochi supposedly dwelled, floods catastrophically to this day, its waters twisting like a serpent's coils. To the ancients, Susanoo's triumph wasn't just a story. It was an explanation for the uncontrollable, a way to frame disaster as something that could be outsmarted, if never fully tamed. Yet Kusanagi's legacy outshines even the serpent's fall. Hidden away at Atsuta shrine for centuries, the sword or its replica, none but the emperor may gaze upon the original, survived wars, fires, and even a supposed theft by monk warriors. During World War II, its preservation became a national obsession, with priests smuggling it to safety ahead of bombing raids. That's the power of myth. It turns blades into legends, storms into gods, and reminds us that sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought with strength alone, but with the wit to turn poison into sake and monsters into meaning. The land of Izumo doesn't just host Susanoo's battle with Orochi, it breathes it. Towering over the region, Mount Dazen's volcanic slopes echo the serpent's coiled forms, while sulphurous hot springs bubble like the beast's boiling blood. This isn't coincidence. The Orochi myth is Shinto's answer to the violence etched into Japan's very bedrock, where earthquakes fracture the ground and eruptions paint the sky with ash. Kami, the spirits worshipped in Shinto, aren't distant gods but forces woven into rivers, storms, and yes, even volcanoes. Susanoo's chaotic nature, his storms, his exile, his sudden shifts from destroyer to savior, mirrors the unpredictable fury of the islands themselves. Consider Orochi's 8 heads. To ancient storytellers, this wasn't just a terrifying detail. It was geography allegorized. Japan's 8 major islands each face unique natural threats: tsunamis in the east, typhoons in the south, landslides in the steep interior. The serpent's regenerative heads symbolize how disasters recur, relentless as the tides. But Shinto cosmology doesn't see this as purely negative. Just as Susanoo's drunken sword strike brings forth Kusanagi, volcanic soil enriches the land, making Japan's rice fields among the most fertile on Earth. Destruction and creation aren't opposites here, they're partners in an eternal dance like the kami themselves. This duality pulses through every layer of the myth. Take the sake used to intoxicate orochi, brewed from rice, a crop sustained by both monsoon rains and volcanic nutrients. The drink represents transformation, turning what's deadly into something that enables victory. Modern Shinto festivals still reflect this. At the annual Ohari, priests scatter paper dolls into rivers, symbolically carrying away impurities. The ritual acknowledges chaos but ritualizes its taming, much like Susanu's strategic use of Orochi's gluttony. Even the sword Kusanagi, born from the serpent's tail, embodies this balance. Forged in violence, it becomes a tool of order, enshrined as a national treasure. The deeper genius lies in how Shinto frames these forces as neither good nor evil. Susanu isn't a hero in the Western sense. He's capricious, flawed, yet capable of greatness when channeling his stormy energy. Similarly, Japan's volcanoes aren't enemies to conquer but respected beings. Mount Fuji, worshipped as the Kami Konohana Sakuya Haim, is both a deadly force and a source of awe. This nuanced view allowed communities to live alongside constant danger without despair, seeing eruptions not as punishments but as the land's restless energy. Modern seismology unintentionally echoes this ancient wisdom. Scientists now know that Japan's tectonic volatility created its islands in the first place. Every earthquake is a reminder of the ongoing creation Susanu's myth encapsulates. When the 2011 tsunami struck, survivors recounted seeing dragon shapes in the waves, proof that these stories aren't relics but living frameworks, still helping people process the unprocessable. Because in Shinto, the world isn't safe, but it is sacred. Every tremor, every flood, every serpent's tooth threaded into the tapestry of meaning. Before Odin ever hung from Yggdrasil or Thor swung his hammer, the Norse cosmos trembled under a different kind of war, not gods against giants, but gods against gods. The Aesir-Vanir War remains one of mythology's most enigmatic conflicts, a clash between two divine factions that ended not with annihilation, but with an uneasy truce that reshaped the pantheon forever. On one side stood the Aesir, warriors and rulers like Odin and Tyr, masters of sovereignty and battle. Opposing them, the Vanir, fertility deities like Njord and his twin children Freya and Freyja, who commanded the tides, the harvest, and the unseen magic called Seda. This wasn't just a petty squabble, it was a culture war written in divine blood where the very nature of power was at stake. The hostilities began with a goddess's mutilation. Gullveig, a mysterious Vanir figure associated with gold and sorcery, arrived in Asgard, her presence igniting Aesir suspicions. 3 times they burned her, and 3 times she was reborn, proof of the Vanir's uncanny mastery over life and death. When the Aesir refused to pay Wergild blood price for this atrocity, the Vanir retaliated with forces no sword could repel. Their weapons weren't just spears, but blights that withered crops and storms that sank ships. The conflict dragged on until both sides, exhausted, agreed to a ceasefire sealed by the most sacred act in Norse culture, the spitting into a vessel. From that mingled saliva, they created Kvasir, the wisest being in existence, a living peace treaty whose eventual murder would later spark the mead of poetry's creation. But the true resolution came through exchange, not annihilation. The Vanir sent their best to Asgard Njord, the god of seafaring wealth, and his radiant children Freya and Freyja. In return, the Aesir dispatched Honir, a god of indecision, and the wise Mimir. Yet this diplomatic swap hid darker currents. When the Vanir discovered Honir's inability to act without Mimir's counsel, they decapitated Mimir and sent his head back to Odin, who preserved it with magic to retain its wisdom. This gruesome twist reveals a crucial truth. The war wasn't just about territory, but cultural assimilation. The Aesir adopted Vanir magic, weaving Seda into their practices, while Freya's worship eventually rivaled Odin's in places like Sweden. What's startling is how archaeology may confirm this myth's roots. Around 3000 BCE, Indo-European migrants, possibly Proto-Aesir, clashed with indigenous Scandinavian farmers, Vanir analogues in the Bronze Age. Linguistic clues linger. Vanir names like Njord connect to older Proto-Germanic words for fertility, while Aesir terminology skews toward governance and war. Burial sites show this fusion. Early Scandinavian graves held both agricultural amulets and weapons, mirroring the gods' eventual coexistence. Even the hostage exchange echoes real practices. Bronze Age treaties often involved swapping elite children to ensure peace. By war's end, the Norse pantheon wasn't just larger, it was transformed. Freyja taught Odin's Seder, blurring gender norms around magic. Freya's ship, Skidbladnir, could fold like cloth, blending Aesir ingenuity with Vanir enchantment. This synthesis birthed a world view where storm and soil, spear and sickle, stood not as opposites but as necessary halves. When Vikings later pillaged monasteries yet prayed for good harvests, they weren't being inconsistent. They were living the Aesir-Vanir compromise, where power came in many forms and even gods had to change to survive. The spittle-mingled creation of Kvasir wasn't just a mythological ceasefire. It was a mirror held up to Viking-age diplomacy, where even bitter enemies understood the value of exchange over annihilation. But the Norse didn't just seal truces with symbolic acts, they etched them into the earth itself. Across Denmark and Sweden, peat bogs preserve eerie evidence of this mindset. Shattered weapons, golden torques twisted beyond recognition, and even entire warships deliberately sunk in shallow waters. These weren't battle trophies or accidental losses. They were peace offerings ritually destroyed to render them useless for conflict, a practice echoing the Aesir and Vanir's decision to spit into that vessel rather than keep fighting. Take the Alerup Adalborg in Denmark, where archaeologists unearthed over 15,000 deliberately broken spearheads, swords, and shields enough to arm an entire army. What's striking isn't just the scale, but the method. Axes were snapped at the haft, swords folded in half like bread dough, and silver-inlaid helmets crushed beyond repair. This wasn't hasty disposal, it was ceremonial decommissioning, a physical declaration that these tools of war would never be wielded again. The parallel to Kvasir's creation is uncanny. Just as the gods transformed their hostility into something new, a being of wisdom, the warriors of Alerup transformed their weapons into something inert, a sacrifice to the land itself. Even more revealing is the Gundestrup cauldron, found in a peat bog with its silver plates depicting gods and warriors side by side. One panel shows a figure dunking warriors headfirst into a vat, possibly symbolizing rebirth after conflict, much like how the Aesir and Vanir emerged from their war not as victors and vanquished but as collaborators. The cauldron's burial location matters too. Bogs in Norse cosmology were liminal spaces where the ordinary rules didn't apply. By sinking treasures there, they mirrored the mythic act of creating Kvasir in a vessel, removing objects from human use and surrendering them to the divine. But the most poignant archaeological echo comes from the Nidam Mose, where a 30-oar warship was meticulously dismantled and submerged around 300 CE. Imagine the labor, not a hasty scuttling, but careful unbinding of planks, removal of rivets and scattering of oars, a deliberate unmaking of the very technology that enabled Viking raids. This mirrors the hostage exchange between the Aesir and Vanir, both sides surrendering something vital to ensure peace. The ship, like Honir and Mimir, became collateral in a fragile truce. What binds these artifacts to the myth is their shared language of binding. The Norse word grith meant both truce and fetter, reflecting a worldview where peace wasn't passive absence of war, but an active restraint like Gleipnir, the ribbon that bound Fenrir, or the spells that held Apep at bay in Egyptian myth. When the Aesir and Vanir spat into that vessel, they weren't just ending a war. They were enacting a sacred restraint, turning violence into something collaborative. And in the bogs, their mortal counterparts did the same, trading swords for sovereignty and conflict for something far more enduring, the wisdom to know when to stop. The first blow of the battle shook Ireland to its roots, not from thunder, but from the club of the dagda, a weapon so massive it left trenches where it dragged. On one side stood the Fomorians, grotesque pirates of the sea, their limbs mismatched, their king Balor's single eye oozing venom that could wither crops with a glance. Opposing them, the Tuatha De Danann, gods of light and skill, though their king Nuada now bore a silver arm, forged after his own was lost in an earlier clash. This wasn't just a fight for land, it was a war between order and primordial chaos, where every sword swing carried the weight of prophecy, and the Morrigan's crows circled overhead, whispering doom to those who dared listen. Nuada's silver arm tells its own story. Crafted by the physician god Dian sect, it moved with divine grace, but its gleam hid a cultural wound. Ancient Celtic law decreed that no king could rule with a blemish, physical or symbolic. Nuada's restoration wasn't just medical, it was political alchemy, turning disability into divinity through craftsmanship. Yet the Fomorians, led by the Cyclopean Balor, represented everything the Tuatha De Danann despised: raw, untamed force over skill, tyranny over sovereignty. Balor's eye, sealed under 7 layers of leather to contain its lethality, wasn't merely a weapon. It was a metaphor for the toxic gaze of oppression, a stare that could petrify progress itself. Enter the Dagda, the good god, whose club could kill 9 men with one end and resurrect them with the other. His cauldron, the Kwa Ansik, never emptied, symbolizing the Tuatha De Danann's covenant with the land, abundance for those who honored balance. But the Fomorians' cauldrons were hollow, their ships lean and hungry, raiding not for need but for the sport of dominion. When the Dagda tricked the Fomorian champion Creidenbull into eating gold, a meal that burst his stomach, it wasn't just cleverness. It was cosmic irony, the pirates who hoarded wealth destroyed by their own greed. Then came the Morrigan, the phantom queen who didn't just predict the future, she shaped it. On the eve of battle, she appeared to the Dagda at a river, washing the limbs of the doomed like a butcher preparing meat. Her prophecy was a riddle wrapped in blood. Battle will be given at sunrise, and the Fomorians will be ground like grain. But the Morrigan's role wasn't passive. She flew over the battlefield as a crow, her screams unraveling Fomorian courage, while her sister goddess Brigid stoked the Tuatha De Danann's fires of inspiration. This duality, terror and creativity, defined Celtic warfare. Victory wasn't just about strength, it was about who could harness the wildest magic. The climax came when Lugh, the radiant young god of all arts, faced Balor. His grandfather's eye began to creak open, its venomous light searing the grass, but Lugh, armed with a sling stone, struck with the precision of a starburst. The stone didn't just puncture the eye, it passed through Balor's skull and out the other side. His death throws flattening ranks of Fomorians. The imagery here is surgical. Light Lugh piercing darkness Balor, not with brute force but with focused skill. Archaeologists have found sling stones at Bronze Age Irish sites, some carved with sigils, hinting at rituals where weapons became sacred texts. Yet the battle's aftermath reveals deeper layers. The Tuatha De Danann didn't exterminate the Fomorians. Some, like the wounded sea god Brez, were spared after teaching the secrets of agriculture, a concession that fertility mattered more than vengeance. Others intermarried with the victors, their bloodlines blending like the tides they once commanded. This wasn't mercy, it was pragmatism. The Celts understood that chaos couldn't be eradicated, only tempered. The Morrigan's crows still feasted, after all, just not on the Tuatha De Danann's dead. Modern Ireland still whispers this conflict. The Boyne Valley, where myth locates Mag Tuaid, holds Neolithic tombs older than the pyramids, their carvings echoing the Dagda's spirals. Folklorists trace Halloween's origins to Samhain, when the Fomorians were said to walk again, their shadows merging with the autumn dark. Even the phrase Bala's eye endures in Irish Gaelic, describing a glaring, pitiless sun. These myths weren't stories, they were survival guides, teaching that every harvest, every piece, was wrested from jaws of chaos by wit, skill, and the occasional silver sleight of hand. The battle between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians wasn't just a clash of gods, it was the changing of seasons written in blood and wheat. When Bala's venomous eye opened, crops withered like they'd been scorched by drought. When Lug's slingstone struck, the land erupted in fertility. This myth wasn't just storytelling, it was an agricultural almanac encoded in divine warfare, explaining why some years brought bounty and others famine. The Fomorians, with their patchwork bodies and rotting ships, embodied the chaos of blight rains that never came, storms that drowned fields, frosts that bit too early. But the Tuatha De Danann, they weren't just warriors, they were inventors of the plough, masters of weather magic, and the reason cows gave milk instead of blood. Take the Dagda's cauldron. It didn't just feed armies, it mirrored the cyclical nature of harvest. Like a field that must lie fallow to regain strength, the cauldron's magic required moments of emptiness before it could overflow again. The Fomorians, with their hollow ships and endless hunger, represented the opposite, extraction without renewal, taking until the land had nothing left. This duality played out in real-life Celtic rituals. Archaeologists have found iron plowshares buried in bogs like offerings, their placement coinciding with lunar cycles. Farmers knew what the myths taught: fertility wasn't guaranteed. It had to be won season after season through careful balance and occasional sacrifice. The Morrigan's role here is especially revealing. She didn't just prophesy battles, she appeared at river fords where livestock crossed, her presence linking warfare with pastoral cycles. In one version of the myth, she mates with the Dagda on the eve of battle, their union ensuring the land's vitality. This wasn't mere erotic symbolism. Cattle raids were a staple of Celtic life, and the spoils of war, herds, grains, tribute directly impacted a tribe's survival through winter. The Fomorians' defeat wasn't just a military victory, it was the first frost that kills pests, the hard winter that ensures a strong spring. Lug himself personifies this seasonal arc. His name shares roots with the old Celtic word for light, and his festival, Lugnasad, marked the start of the harvest. The games held in his honor weren't just entertainment, they were physical tests to ensure the community's fitness for reaping and storing food. When he defeats Bala, it's no accident that the act echoes the sun breaking through storm clouds. Even the silver in Nuada's prosthetic arm carries meaning. Silver deposits in Ireland often lie near rivers, veins of metallic milk feeding the earth. The Tuatha De Danann's mastery of metallurgy wasn't just about weapons. It reflected an understanding that technology like the plough or the sickle could tilt the scales between starvation and surplus. Modern farmers in County Meath still recount how the Second Battle of Mag Tuaid left the plains so fertile that 3 harvests could grow in a single year. Beneath the exaggeration lies a kernel of truth. Soil samples from the region show unusually high levels of iron and lime minerals linked to ancient ash deposits and bone meal, remnants of ritual burning. The Tuatha De Danann didn't just fight for territory, they fought for the right to turn chaos into compost, to weave famine into feast, because in the end, the greatest cosmic battle wasn't fought with clubs or slingstones. It was fought with roots breaking through frost and the stubborn belief that even in the hungriest winter, spring remembers the way back. The battlefield of Troy shudders not just under the trample of warriors, but the footsteps of gods themselves, an eruption of divine carnage so raw it cracks open the sky. In Book 20 of the Iliad, Homer shatters the usual order where Olympians merely manipulate mortals from afar. This time they descend in fury, pairing off like champions in a melee that mirrors the chaos below. Poseidon, Earth-shaker and Lord of the Deep, locks spears with Apollo, god of the golden bow, their clash sending tidal waves crashing against mountain ranges. Meanwhile, Athena, grey-eyed and gleaming in her father Zeus's aegis, duels Ares, the blood-drunk fury of war, her strategy meeting his madness head-on. This is the Titanomachy, the war of the gods, and it reveals something startling. Even the divine can't resist the pull of primal conflict. Poseidon and Apollo's confrontation is no random matchup. Their opposites incarnate the sea's crushing depths versus the sun's piercing light. When Poseidon hurls a tsunami at Apollo's feet, the archer doesn't retaliate with arrows but parts the waters with a melody, his lyre's strings plucking the waves into submission. Here Homer shows us that gods don't fight like mortals. Their battles are elemental, ocean against music, brute force against artistry. Yet beneath the spectacle lies a bitter irony. Apollo, patron of Troy, and Poseidon, who once built its walls, now tear at each other over a city they both helped create. The gods' feud mirrors the human folly below, allies turned enemies, shared history drowned in wrath. Athena's duel with Ares is even more revelatory. She doesn't just overpower him, she outthinks him. As Ares charges, his roar shaking the horizon, Athena sidesteps and heaves a boulder, not just any stone, but one, black and jagged, left in the plain slashed by men long ago as a boundary marker. The symbolism cuts deep. Ares, embodiment of mindless violence, trips over the very laws of civilization he scorns. Meanwhile, Athena wields order as a weapon, turning land rights into projectiles. Their fight exposes the duality of war, not just bloodshed, but the collision between chaos and structure. Homer's genius lies in how this divine brawl refracts mortal struggles. When Athena later disguises herself as a human general to rally the Greeks, or Apollo whisks a Trojan prince from danger, it's a reminder. The gods' war isn't parallel to humanity's, it's its distorted mirror. Mortals fight for glory or survival, the gods battle over pride and principle. Yet in the dust of Troy, those distinctions blur. Ares, wounded by Athena's stone, howls to Olympus, his ichor staining the earth like any man's blood. For all their power, the gods are prisoners of passion, proving that in war, whether fought with spears or storms, no one escapes their nature. The Titanomachy's aftermath whispers another truth. Zeus, watching from his throne, doesn't punish the brawling gods. He laughs. Their fury amuses him because it's inevitable, as natural as tides or thunder. And that's the unsettling heart of Homer's vision. War isn't an aberration. It's woven into the fabric of existence, divine and mortal alike, as inescapable as the fates' threads. Later poets would tidy up the gods, make them moral or remote. But in the Iliad, they brawl like tavern drunks because sometimes even Olympus needs to feel the sting of a well-thrown stone. There's something almost absurd about watching gods, beings who shape the cosmos with a thought, stumble over boulders and scream in pain like overgrown children. Homer's Titanomachy doesn't just depict divine conflict, it strips the Olympians of their grandeur, revealing them as petty, bruised, and startlingly human. When Ares, god of war, takes Athena's boulder to the face and collapses like a toppled statue, his ichor gushing as he bellows about favoritism, it's hard not to laugh. This isn't the dignified pantheon of later philosophers who envisioned gods as perfect, unchanging ideals. This is family drama with lightning bolts, where even immortality can't save you from your sister's well-aimed rock. The slapstick violence serves a deeper purpose. By making the gods ridiculous, Homer undermines the very idea of war as glorious or noble. If deities supposedly wiser and more powerful can devolve into squabbling toddlers, what does that say about the mortals below, dying for scraps of honor? Take Artemis, the virgin huntress, fleeing in tears after Hera boxes her ears and steals her bow. Or Aphrodite, whimpering back to Olympus when a mortal spear grazes her wrist, her divine vanity bruised more than her skin. These aren't mythic archetypes, they're overgrown celebrities, their egos as fragile as their immortality is absolute. Yet this divine comedy isn't just mockery. It's a sly commentary on power's corrupting allure. Zeus, perched above the fray, doesn't intervene, he chuckles, treating the brawl as entertainment. His detachment mirrors how the gods view human suffering, a diverting spectacle. Later philosophers like Plato would recoil at this portrayal, insisting gods must be morally perfect beyond such base impulses. But Homer's Olympians are messy, flawed, and all the more relatable for it. When Hephaestus limps forward to break up a fight, his smith's muscles straining, we're reminded that even divinity has its limits. The contrast with later theology couldn't be starker. Aristotle's unmoved mover or Plotinus's the one are abstract, devoid of whimsy or wrath. They don't throw tantrums or trip over rivers. But Homer's gods, for all their folly, feel alive. Their pettiness makes their rare moments of genuine nobility, like Thetis comforting Achilles, shine brighter. By letting them be ridiculous, Homer doesn't diminish their power, he makes their humanity inescapable. After all, what's more terrifying than a god who fights like a mortal, grudges, flared tempers and all? And perhaps that's the real lesson. Later philosophies scrub the gods clean of flaws, turning them into sterile ideals. But Homer's pantheon, bruised and bellowing, reminds us that power doesn't elevate, it exaggerates. Ares isn't just the god of war, he's war itself, as stupid as it is brutal. Athena's wisdom doesn't make her serene, it makes her a strategist who fights dirty. In the end, the Titanomachy isn't just myth, it's a mirror held up to the absurdity of violence, divine or otherwise, and the punchline is always the same. Thunder rolls across the Anatolian plateau, shaking the walls of Hattusa, the Hittite capital where clay tablets preserve one of humanity's oldest dragon-slaying tales. Not Zeus, not Thor, but Tarhunt, the storm god whose name means the conqueror, squares off against Ilyanka, a serpent so massive its coils could strangle the horizon. This isn't just a myth, it's a ritual blueprint etched in cuneiform for priests to reenact every spring during the Purulai festival. The tablets describe a battle so primal it begins with deception. Tarhunt's daughter bargains with the dragon, luring it to a feast where the gods ambush it with storms and divine weaponry. But here's the twist, this isn't a straightforward victory. In one version, Ilyanka steals Tarhunt's heart and eyes, leaving the storm god crippled until his mortal son marries the dragon's daughter to regain them through treachery. This isn't just good versus evil, it's a cycle of loss, cunning, and uneasy alliances written in lightning and blood. What makes this myth extraordinary isn't just its brutality, but its intimacy. The Hittites didn't keep Ilyanka's story locked in temples. They brought it into the streets. During Purulai, actors donned serpent masks while priests chanted from tablets, reenacting Tarhunt's struggle to ensure the year's fertility. Archaeologists have found evidence of these rituals in temple courtyards, where pits filled with animal bones and smashed pottery suggest feasting akin to the dragon's fatal banquet. The parallels run deeper. Purulai coincided with the spring equinox when thunderstorms returned to water crops, making Tarhunt's victory over chaos a matter of survival. Farmers didn't just watch the spectacle, they participated, shouting spells to bind the serpent as priests hurled symbolic spears. This was myth as collective exorcism, a way to wrest order from nature's chaos through collective will. The Hittite version of the Chaoscamph motif stands apart for its raw pragmatism. Unlike Marduk's clean dismantling of Tiamat or Indra's thunderous triumph over Vritra, Tarhunt's victory is messy, even compromised. In the second version of the myth, his son must marry the enemy's offspring to regain his stolen organs, a metaphor for the delicate negotiations Hittite kings made with rival states. The dragon isn't annihilated, it's outmaneuvered, its power co-opted through marriage pacts and subterfuge. This reflects the Hittites' own empire-building strategy, where conquest often gave way to diplomatic marriages and vassal treaties. Even the storm god, it seems, couldn't rely on brute force alone. Yet the most haunting detail lies in the aftermath. after Ilianka's defeat, Tarhunt doesn't ascend to uncontested rule. Instead, the myth ends with an instruction: let the land prosper and let the crops grow tall. The battle isn't for glory, it's for equilibrium. Modern excavations at Hattusa reveal something startling. Cuneiform tablets describing Ilianka's myth were stored alongside treaties and agricultural records. To the Hittites, cosmic warfare and barley yields were threads in the same tapestry. When lightning split the sky, it wasn't just a god's anger, it was the sound of the world being remade, one fragile harvest at a time. So the next time you see a storm gathering on the horizon, remember Tarhunt, not as a distant deity, but as a reminder that even gods must sometimes bargain with monsters, and that spring doesn't come through force alone, but through the willingness to sit at the serpent's table and outwit it on its own terms. The serpent Ilianka's coils slither far beyond Hittite soil, winding their way into the DNA of Near Eastern mythology like a river carving its path through stone. Fast forward a few centuries and you'll spot her echo in the Babylonian chaos dragon Tiamat, whose dismembered corpse mirrors Ilianka's fate at Tarhunt's hands. But the most startling transformation occurs further west, where the dragon-slaying motif resurfaces in an unexpected place, the legend of St. George. How does a Bronze Age Hittite serpent morph into the beast slain by a Christian martyr? The threads connecting these stories reveal how myths evolve, adapt, and sometimes outlive the empires that birthed them. Start with the obvious parallels. Like Tarhunt, George faces a dragon demanding human sacrifices, often depicted as a winged serpent with scales like armor, a direct descendant of Ilianka's chthonic menace. But here's where the stories diverge fascinatingly. In the oldest versions of George's tale, rooted in Cappadocian folklore, the dragon isn't just a monster. It's a force poisoning the land's water supply, much like Ilianka's association with subterranean waters and seasonal droughts. This isn't coincidence. Cappadocia was once part of the Hittite sphere, and local oral traditions preserved fragments of Ilianka's myth long after Hattusa's fall. When Christianity spread through Anatolia, older symbols weren't erased, they were baptized. The dragon, once a symbol of chaos battled by storm gods, became Satan incarnate, while the victorious slayer shifted from Tarhunt to a soldier saint. The weaponry tells its own story. Tarhunt wielded hurriers, a Hittite word meaning both lightning and divine weapon, a concept echoed when George's spear is later described as flashing like heavenly fire. Even the ritual elements persist. Just as Hittite priests reenacted Ilianka's defeat during Purulai, medieval Christians performed dragon-slaying pageants on St. George's feast day, complete with effigies burned in bonfires to symbolize the triumph of holiness. The methods changed, but the underlying need to ritually reaffirm order over chaos remained eerily consistent. Yet the most profound link lies in the dragon's role as a threshold guardian. Ilianka wasn't merely a villain, she was a gatekeeper of primordial forces, her defeat marking the transition from winter to spring. George's dragon, too, often lurks near water sources or cave mouths, guarding or corrupting life-giving elements. This shared symbolism suggests something universal. Dragons aren't just monsters to be killed. They're embodiments of the untamed wildness that must be negotiated, whether by storm gods, saints, or the collective imagination of cultures grasping for control in an uncertain world. Modern archaeology adds another layer. Frescoes in Cappadocian rock-cut churches show George's dragon with distinctly Hittite stylistic touches, serpentine coils resembling those on Bronze Age seals from Hattusa. Even the name George, Greek for farmer, hints at agrarian roots, tying back to Tarhunt's role as a fertility deity who ensured rains after defeating Ilianka. The dragon-slaying archetype didn't spread by accident. It traveled along trade routes, mutated through conquests, and survived because it answered a primal question: how do we keep the chaos at bay? So the next time you see a medieval painting of St. George, look closer. beneath the gilded halo and flowing cape, you might glimpse the shadow of a much older hero, and a serpent who's been dying and being reborn for over 3,000 years. Because some battles aren't just fought with swords or spears, but in the stories we tell to make sense of the storms both outside our doors and within our souls. The tablets of Nippur tremble with a story even older than the Epic of Gilgamesh, a divine rebellion that crackles with the smoke of forges and the sweat of mortals. Before humans built ziggurats or kings ruled from Uruk, the Anunnaki, Sumer's pantheon of primordial deities, waged their own brutal civil war. At its heart stood Enlil, god of wind and order, whose decrees carved the first laws into the fabric of existence. But his younger kin, the Igigi, had grown weary of laboring under his rule, digging riverbeds, tilling celestial fields, and maintaining the machinery of creation. Their uprising wasn't just myth, it was a coded reflection of the earliest worker revolts in Mesopotamia's burgeoning city-states, where temple construction and irrigation projects demanded back-breaking toil. Picture the Igigi not as abstract deities but as divine laborers cloaked in the dust of endless labor. For 3,600 years by Sumerian reckoning, they hauled mud bricks and dredged canals under Enlil's command, their resentment simmering like bitumen in a smelter's pit. When they finally cast down their tools and surrounded Enlil's temple in Nippur, the confrontation echoed real-world strikes recorded on cuneiform tablets like the reform texts of Urukagina, where workers protested excessive taxation and forced labor. The Igigi's demand was revolutionary: either lighten their burden or they'd tear apart the very order they'd built. Enter Enki, the cunning god of wisdom and freshwater. His solution, not brute force but radical innovation. Let us create a new being, he proposed, one to bear the yoke in their stead. Thus, humanity was sculpted from clay mixed with the blood of a slain rebel god, a grim compromise that transferred divine suffering to mortal shoulders. The myth's parallels to Mesopotamian society are chilling. Excavations at Ur and Eridu reveal mass graves of laborers buried with their tools, their skeletons bearing marks of repetitive stress and malnutrition. To the Sumerians, the Anunnaki rebellion wasn't just theology. It explained why kings ruled and workers toiled, why hierarchy felt as inevitable as the Tigris floods. Yet there's a subversive edge to this tale. The Igigi's rebellion succeeded in a way. They won respite through humanity's creation, just as real-world reforms occasionally eased temple workers' burdens. And the sacrificed rebel god's blood, it became the spark of human consciousness, a divine inheritance that made us more than mere beasts of burden. Later texts like the Atrahasis epic expand this irony. When humans grow too noisy under Enlil's harsh rule, it's Enki who saves them from divine retribution, subtly undermining the very hierarchy he helped create. Archaeology breathes life into these layers. Cylinder seals depict the Anunnaki with pickaxes and baskets, their divine status blurred with the laborer's grind. Temple records from Lagash list rations for construction crews alongside offerings to Enlil, blurring the line between myth and payroll. Even the word Igigi shares roots with terms for toil and weariness in Akkadian, suggesting these gods began as metaphors for the workforce that built civilization from mud and reed. The Anunnaki rebellion's legacy lingers in unexpected places. When the Hebrew Bible describes fallen angels or the Nephilim, it's retelling fragments of this Mesopotamian upheaval. Modern labor movements, too, unknowingly echo the Igigi's defiance because some struggles transcend time, whether fought in the dust of Nippur or on factory floors today. The real lesson: even gods must negotiate with those who bear the weight of their world, and sometimes the clay remembers the hands that shaped it. The scorching Mesopotamian sun beat down on laborers dredging canals, their backs bent under the weight of clay bricks, a scene so familiar it bled into the heavens. The Igigi's rebellion wasn't just divine drama, it was a mirror held up to the back-breaking reality of Sumer's irrigation wars, Along the Tigris and Euphrates, where fields lived or died by water, disputes over canal access sparked blood feuds between city-states. The gods toiled digging riverbeds. Hauling silt was celestial shorthand for human struggles to tame the very rivers that nurtured civilization. When the Ijigi downed tools, they echoed real-life strikes like the one in Lagash, where workers abandoned silt-clogged canals until their rations were restored. Archaeologists have unearthed cuneiform tablets detailing these conflicts with bureaucratic precision. One ledger from Umma records a bitter feud over diverted water, where a single breached levee could starve an entire province. Another from Gersu lists rations withheld from laborers until they repaired a collapsed canal, strikingly similar to the Ijigi's demand for relief. Even the myth's resolution rings true. Just as Enki created humans to absorb divine labor, Sumerian elites conscripted prisoners and debtors into work gangs, pushing the burden downward. The Anunnaki rebellion, then, wasn't allegory. It was a divine ratification of hierarchy, explaining why some knelt in mud while others ruled from ziggurats. But the metaphor cuts deeper. The Ijigi's rebellion coincided with Mesopotamia's agricultural revolution, when irrigation systems grew complex enough to require centralized control. Temples became hydraulic headquarters, their priests calculating water allotments with lunar calendars. The gods' revolt mirrored this shift, ancient laborers resisting the very systems that fed empires. Modern satellite imagery still traces the ghosts of these disputes, abandoned canals radiating from like scars, their silt layers telling stories of droughts and diverted flows. The myth's enduring power lies in its uncomfortable truth. Civilization was built on borrowed labor, divine or mortal. When we turn on a tap today, we're still drinking from those same ancient channels, and the echoes of the Ijigi's defiance still ripple through every strike, every protest, every weary voice insisting enough. A blaze of celestial fire erupts across the vault of heaven, not from comet or supernova, but from the sweeping tail of a great red dragon as it plummets toward Earth. The Book of Revelation's 12th chapter paints this cosmic battle with strokes so vivid they've ignited debates for millennia. The archangel Michael leading heaven's armies against a seven-headed serpent, its fall shaking the stars from their courses. But peel back the apocalyptic imagery and you'll find layers older than Christianity itself. This isn't just divine warfare, it's an astronomical cipher, a political manifesto, and the climax of a cosmic struggle whispered about in desert scrolls centuries before John of Patmos etched his visions. Let's decode the symbolism piece by piece. The woman clothed with the sun, giving birth while the dragon waits to devour her child. Ancient astronomers would have recognized Virgo, the virgin constellation, crowned by the sun's annual passage each September. The same time of year Jewish tradition places the creation of the world. The dragon's 7 heads mirror the 7 classical planets known to antiquity, including Sun and Moon, while its tail sweeping a third of the stars echoes a recurring ancient Near Eastern motif, gods deposing rebellious celestial beings. Even Michael's name holds a clue. Michael means who is like God, in Hebrew a battle cry against those who overreach their station. This isn't random poetry. It's celestial cartography, mapping spiritual conflict onto the night sky's grand theater. But the roots dig deeper than stars. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, scholars found the War Scroll, a 1st century BC text describing an ultimate battle between sons of light and sons of darkness, led by a celestial Michael. Parallels abound: angelic hosts, a 40-year war, and the dragon-like Leviathan lurking as a symbol of chaos. These Essene warriors believed they were reenacting a primordial struggle, one revelation repurposes for a Roman-era audience facing persecution. The dragon isn't just Satan, it's coded shorthand for imperial Rome, its 7 heads representing the 7 hills of the capital, its blasphemous mouths the emperor cult demanding worship. Yet the most revolutionary twist lies in Michael's victory. Unlike Zeus thunderbolting titans or Marduk dismembering Tiamat, this battle tips not through violence but judicial decree. Satan isn't slain, he's cast down by testimony and sacrifice, a theological mic drop against Roman imperial theology where emperors claim to conquer through divine right. Early Christian catacomb art drives this home. Frescoes show Michael not with a sword but a balanced scale, weighing souls against the dragon's accusations. The real weapon here is righteousness, turning celestial warfare into a courtroom drama where bloodied martyrs out-argue the prosecutor of the cosmos. Modern astronomers might smile at how Revelation's imagery intersects with reality. The great sign of the dragon could reflect a first-century meteor shower, while the woman's flight into wilderness aligns with a documented comet in 70 CE. But the deeper truth transcends literal skies. Whether read as coded resistance, cosmic allegory, or visionary prophecy, this battle endures because it speaks to a primal human ache, the hope that when chaos rears its head, whether as empire or inner demon, there's a force greater still that names it, fights it, and reminds us, even falling stars leave traces of light. Brilliant hues of gold and crimson burn across centuries-old vellum as Michael's wings unfurl in the tres riches Asuras do duck to bury, his armored foot crushing the dragon's throat in a pose that would define celestial warfare for generations. Medieval illuminators didn't just illustrate Revelation's cosmic battle, they weaponized color and composition to make divine conflict visceral. Lapis lazuli pigment, ground from Afghan gemstones more precious than gold, became the celestial backdrop for these clashes, while mercury-based vermilion painted the dragon's spilled ichor with toxic brilliance. Every brushstroke was theology in motion. The triumphant archangel's halo, often gilded with real gold leaf, wasn't mere decoration. It mirrored the Eucharist's radiance, implying that spiritual victory required both martial might and sacramental purity. Flip to Renaissance Florence and the battlefield shifts. Luca Signorelli's The Fall of the Damned in Orvieto Cathedral shows angels not as serene heralds but as muscular athletes, their bodies twisted in dynamic combat with demons whose forms blend human suffering with bestial frenzy. Signorelli studied anatomy alongside Michelangelo, dissecting corpses to understand how tendons strain in struggle, a detail that makes his celestial warriors pulse with unsettling realism. The dragon here sheds its heraldic symmetry, becoming a swarm of hybrid horrors, bat wings grafted to serpent scales, mouths gaping with piscine teeth. These weren't flights of fancy, they were psychological warfare designed to imprint the stakes of spiritual combat on every parishioner who craned their neck to see the chapel ceiling. Yet the most subversive reinterpretation lurks in Pieter Bruegel, The Elders, The Fall of the Rebel Angels. His 1562 masterpiece transforms the cosmic battle into a grotesque carnival, where heaven's host battles not a singular dragon but an explosion of Boschian nightmares, fish-headed demons, armor plating made of rotting fruit, a trumpet vomiting frogs. Bruegel's genius lies in his inversion. The divine angels wear plain brown robes while the fallen glimmer with false gold, a visual jab at the corruption festering within the church itself. Hidden in this chaos is an alchemical Easter egg. The central demon's segmented body mirrors period illustrations of distillation apparatus, suggesting evil's ability to transmute virtue into vice. These artists did more than depict myth, they weaponized it. When the Vatican commissioned Raphael to fresco the Battle of Ostia alongside his expulsion of Heliodorus, they weren't just decorating walls. They were drawing a direct parallel between biblical angelic victory and the Church's temporal power over invading forces. Even the pigments carried political weight. Ultramarine blue, sourced through Venetian trade routes, subtly asserted Christianity's global reach while justifying its colonial ventures. To gaze at these works was to receive propaganda written in lapis and blood. Today's superhero blockbusters owe these images an unacknowledged debt. From the winged holocaust of Dragon's Dogma to the luminous warfare of Diablo Roman 4, modern pixels still chase the sublime terror first conjured by monks hunched over parchment by candlelight. The real battle wasn't just in heaven, it was for the human imagination, and the victors wrote history in gold leaf and crushed insects, ensuring we'd never see the divine quite the same way again. Long before archangels and demons faced off in the deserts of Persia, before even the thunderous clashes of the Devas and Asuras echoed across Hindu texts, the same god stood on both sides of the cosmic divide. The ancient Indo-Iranians worshipped a pantheon where Devas and Asuras weren't enemies but coexisting divine forces, Devas governing the storm-lit skies, Asuras upholding sacred order through ritual fire and covenant. The split that birthed Zoroastrianism's stark dualism didn't just redefine these gods. It rewrote the cosmic battlefield itself, turning shared heritage into holy war. At the heart of this schism stands Zarathustra's revelation that Ahura Mazda, once a peer among Asuras, was the sole uncreated light, while the Devas were recast as liars and corruptors under Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. This wasn't mere theological tweaking. Archaeologists tracing the migration of Indo-Iranian peoples into Persia found fire altars abruptly replacing sacrificial pits, material proof of a revolution in thought. Where earlier hymns like the Rigveda praised Indra a diva for slaying the chaos serpent Vritra, Zoroastrian texts now condemned that same act as violence against Ahura Mazda's orderly creation. The Vendidad describes Angra Mainyu counter creating monsters for every beast Ahura Mazda fashioned, serpents to poison rivers, flies to spread plague, and winter itself as a weapon against life. Yet fragments of the old unity linger. The Vedic god Mitra, a benevolent solar figure, survives in Zoroastrianism as Mithra, though stripped of his diva associations and rebuilt as a warrior for truth. Even the sacred drink Hayama Vedic Soma persists, but purified of its ecstatic Devik roots, symbolizing clarity rather than intoxication. The Gathas, Zarathustra's hymns, crackle with this tension. In one verse, Ahura Mazda declares, "Neither our thoughts nor teachings nor wills agree," drawing a line in the cosmic sand that earlier traditions had never imagined. The battlegrounds shifted too. In the Avesta, the world isn't just a prize to be won but a constructed fortress, Ahura Mazda's seven-layered sky, a barricade against Angra Mainyu's assaults, each element a soldier in this divine siege. Contrast this with Hindu cosmology, where Devas and Asuras churn the ocean together for the nectar of immortality, their rivalry cyclical rather than apocalyptic. Zoroastrianism's innovation was linear time, a final battle where Spenta Mainyu, the Holy Spirit, and Angra Mainyu would meet in the Frashokrati, the world's fiery renewal. Modern scholars see this dualism reflected in Persian history itself. When Cyrus the Great's armies marched under the banner of Ahura Mazda, their conquests weren't just territorial, they were theological, imposing a cosmic narrative where light must vanquish darkness. Yet the old bonds resisted total erasure. In remote Zoroastrian communities, folk rituals still whisper of Devas not as demons, but as wayward kin ghosts of a shared past too deep to fully excise. Because some divides aren't just about gods, but about how we choose to remember what was once whole. The final act of Zoroastrianism's cosmic war isn't destruction, it's purification by fire. Frashokrati, the making wonderful, begins when the last embers of Angra Mainyu's resistance gutter out and the world plunges into a river of molten metal. But this isn't punishment, it's surgery. Every living being, mortal or divine, must wade through this crucible. For the righteous, the metal flows like warm milk. For the wicked, it scalds away corruption, not to torment but to heal. Even the earth itself is reshaped. Mountains flatten into plains so no shadow remains, and the dead rise, their bones knitted back together by divine alchemy. This isn't Armageddon, it's a cosmic reset where evil isn't defeated so much as dissolved into the fabric of Ahura Mazda's original design. The echoes of this vision ripple through Jewish and Christian eschatology in ways that rewrite the apocalyptic playbook. Take the book of Daniel's fiery furnace, where the righteous walk unharmed, a near-perfect mirror of Frashocrates' selective flames. Early Jewish mystics spoke of Gehenna not as eternal torment, but as a 12-month refining fire, a clear parallel to Zoroastrianism's belief that hell is temporary and therapeutic. Even the New Testament's lake of fire, Revelation 20:14, loses its infernal edge when read through this lens. It's where death itself is destroyed, not where souls burn endlessly. The influence cuts deeper than imagery. Zoroastrianism's linear timeline creation, struggle, renewal replaced the cyclical cosmologies of the ancient Near East, giving Judaism and later Christianity a narrative arc where history has a destination, not just repetition. But the most profound borrowing lies in the messianic blueprint. Zoroastrianism's Saoshyant, a world restorer born of a virgin and Zoroaster's own seed, prefigures Christian eschatology's returning Christ. Both figures orchestrate final battles, resurrect the dead, and preside over a renewed earth. The Dead Sea Scrolls hint at how these ideas permeated Second Temple Judaism. The teacher of righteousness expected a dual Messiah, one priestly and one royal, echoing Zoroastrianism's belief in multiple saviors. Even the three magi who followed the star to Bethlehem weren't just Persian astrologers, they were heirs to a tradition that had spent centuries mapping the intersection of cosmic war and redemption. Yet the differences are as revealing as the parallels. Zoroastrianism's renewal is physical corpses reassembled, rivers running with milk. Christian resurrection is more transcendent, bodies made incorruptible. And where Frashocrates is inevitable, a cosmic law as fixed as sunrise, biblical apocalypses hinge on moral choices, a divine will that could theoretically accelerate or delay the end based on human repentance. These nuances matter because they show how cultures adapt shared myths to their deepest values. The Persians saw the universe as a machine needing repair. The Jews and Christians saw it as a relationship awaiting reconciliation. Modern believers might be startled to learn how much their end times imagery owes to Zoroaster. But the real lesson isn't about borrowing, it's about the enduring human need to believe chaos isn't the last word. Whether through fire or grace, the promise remains. Night won't have the final say. Morning comes, and when it does, even the scars of the long war will gleam like gold in the light of a remade sun. Before light, before wind, before even the first human breath, the Maori cosmos was a clenched fist, Rangi the Skyfather pressing so tightly against Papa the Earth Mother that their children lived in perpetual darkness, folded between their parents' bodies like seeds in unbroken soil. These weren't just gods, they were primordial forces, their love so all-consuming it stifled the very world they'd created together. Their offspring Tain of the forests, Tohiri of storms, Tangaroa of the sea, whispered in the blackness, debating an unthinkable act to sever the embrace that had birthed them. Tain Mahuta, god of towering kori trees and all that roots and reaches, made the fateful choice. Unlike his brothers who hesitated, Tumatoanga, god of war, advocating for violence, while Rongo, god of cultivated food, pleaded for patience, Tain understood that growth required rupture. Planting his feet on Papa's chest, he stretched his spine upward, pushing with the slow, inexorable force of a sapling splitting stone. For days, or perhaps centuries, time being fluid in this primal dark, Tain strained, his muscles knotting like hardwood, until with a final surge, Rangi was wrenched skyward. Light flooded the world for the first time, revealing forests Tain would populate with birds, and seas where Tangaroa's fish would dart through waves. But the cost was immediate. Tohira, god of tempests, furious at this rending of unity, unleashed hurricanes to punish his siblings. His winds shattered Tangaroa's oceans against rocks, forcing the sea god's creatures into hiding. He uprooted Tain's forests, sending birds spiraling into the chaos. Even today, Maori navigators reading the waves and winds see this ancient quarrel in every storm and tour. Hiri's wrath, a reminder that creation is never clean, never kind, and always paid for in scars. What's haunting is how this myth echoes in the very bones of Polynesian wayfinding. Traditional Karakia chants still invoke the separation of Rangi and Papa when navigating by stars, as if every voyage retraces Tain's first upward push. The star compass used by Maori sailors isn't just a tool. It's a celestial map of this fractured family, with certain stars representing Rangi's tears, rain, or Papa's sighs, earthquakes. When navigators chant the story of Tain's deed, they aren't just recounting myth, they're aligning themselves with the primal forces that still govern wind, wave, and wood. Modern science offers an eerie parallel. Geologists note that New Zealand's tectonic plates, the Pacific and Indo-Australian, grind together with a tension mirroring Rangi and Papa's strained separation. The Maori word for earthquake, ruwenua, translates to the shaking of the land, described in oral traditions as Papa shivering with longing for her distant husband. Even the photosynthesis of Tain's trees unknowingly mirrors the myth, leaves reaching for Rangi's light while roots cling to Papa's soil, forever bridging what was torn apart. Yet the true power of this story lies in its refusal to vilify anyone. Rangi and Papa's love wasn't wrong, just unsustainable. Tain's act wasn't cruel, just necessary. And Tohiri's storms, they're the price of a world where light and growth can exist at all. Every time a Polynesian sailor charts a course through gales, or a farmer tends crops under the open sky, they're living the aftermath of that first divine rebellion, not as tragedy, but as the only way life could begin. From the thunderous wars of Olympus to the silent, star-spanning battles of Polynesian navigators, one truth echoes across every myth we've explored: creation is born from conflict. Whether it's Marduk carving the heavens from Tiamat's corpse, the Maori god Tain forcing apart sky and earth, or the Norse gods bracing for Ragnarok's inevitable storm, these stories all grapple with the same primal tension, the fragile balance between order and chaos. But here's what's fascinating: these aren't just tales of destruction. They're blueprints for resilience, reminding us that even the most violent cosmic clashes can birth new worlds, new wisdom, and sometimes entirely new ways of being. Look to the stars and you'll find these myths written in celestial ink. The Babylonians tracked Marduk's victory in the movements of Jupiter. The Greeks saw the Milky Way as the spilled breast milk of Hera, and the Aztecs timed sacrifices to Venus's appearance as Quetzalcoatl's returning light. These weren't random connections, they were humanity's first attempts to map meaning onto the cosmos, to say, this chaos isn't meaningless, it's part of a story where even gods bleed so the sun can rise. Now we want to hear your chapter in this epic. Which cosmic battle lingers in your imagination? Is it Zeus anew outsmarting the eight-headed Orochi, or the eternal dance of the Devas and Asuras? Drop your favorite myth in the comments, because every culture, every voice adds another thread to this vast tapestry of stars and struggle. And this is just the beginning. We're diving deeper into the blood-soaked fields of Celtic prophecy, the labyrinthine wars of Hindu epics, and the untold battles whispered in African and indigenous traditions. Because the universe's greatest stories aren't just about gods and monsters, they're about us, flawed, fierce, and forever reaching for the light. So until next time, keep looking up. The night sky isn't just a scattering of stars, it's a battlefield, a workshop, and a canvas where every constellation tells a story of something shattered and